cannot believe is the 100th episode of Everyday Inclusion Live, where we have talked about, and we will continue to talk about, everything under the sun that relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I am Mo Berkner-Boyd. I'm a white woman with mid-length red hair. Texana and I were just talking. I gave myself bangs a couple weeks ago. I am wearing red frames, black shirt, and behind me I've got a bookshelf. My pronouns are she, her. And on this occasion, I also want to acknowledge that I am sitting on Ute and Arapaho land. I always think about what's gotten me to the work and acknowledging the past and current reality, I think, is a huge part of that. Oh, y'all, I have four amazing DEI leaders with me today. They've all been on the series in the past. And when we realized, it was interesting, somebody on the team said, Mo, how many of these have you done? And we went through and we went, oh my gosh, it's going to be 100. I reached out to these four to see if they would join me. So I'm going to do some introductions for them, but let me tell you, y'all, I highly, highly recommend, if you're not connected with these four, connect with them on LinkedIn, reach out to them. They are truly people that I look to all the time to be in conversation with, to learn from, which is really what this series is all about. And I'm going to give some context on this series before we jump into the questions and after introductions, just so you can understand what we've been up to and why. But first, it is my great pleasure. Andres, I'm starting with you. So Andres Gonzalez is VP of Community Engagement and Chief Diversity Officer at Froedtert Health. He has successfully created and implemented community engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion and supplier diversity programs for a number of the country's most respected healthcare organizations. His teams have positively affected their organizations by penetrating diverse markets and making substantial impact on the communities they serve, ensuring patients receive culturally and linguistically competent care that leads to better health outcomes. Fun fact, Andres enjoys spending time with his family, 4 boys, y'all, a daughter-in-law and 2 grandkids. They enjoy traveling abroad, which allows them to learn about other countries' histories, cultures, and cuisines. Cheryl Kern is Vice President, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging with MillerKnoll. Those of you that may be sitting in a Herman Miller chair, that's part of MillerKnoll. She leads strategy development and implementation, which aligns to targeted DEIB commitments and priorities in support of driving business results and maximizing contributions of MillerKnoll's associates. As part of MillerKnoll's corporate Better World strategy, Cheryl has leadership responsibility for business resource groups, advancement, diversifying the field of design, fostering supplier diversity, elevating philanthropic engagement, and enabling inclusive learning and diverse talent success. Fun fact, Cheryl has written a book of poetry and hopes to get it and a book focused on women's leadership development published in the future. Cheryl, I want to read that poetry. Alex Martinez is Senior Director of Global Diversity, Talent, Innovation, and Strategic Engagements at Nike. He also sits on the global DEI leadership team, leading Nike's Latinx strategy work across the enterprise. In his current role, he's responsible for leading the design and execution of accelerated diverse representation programs across the country in partnerships with leagues, teams, signature athletes, key Nike groups, and external organizations and partnerships. Fun fact, wife, 2 kids, and a dog named Rosie, and in his free time, and I love Alex, fits so perfectly with the organization you work with, he loves playing, coaching, and watching sports. Last but not least, Texana Reeves is Vice President of DEI and Associate Experience, which is a new part of her role, for Rite Aid. In her role, Texana is responsible for leading the development and execution of DEI enterprise strategy and developing and leading associate experience strategy. She is recognized by leaders as an expert in developing DEI management systems and has had a progressive career working with large global Fortune 50 companies. Her approach to DEI is to work with passion and commitment to achieving results, yet enjoys laughing and having fun achieving it, which is so key. Fun fact, Texana has traveled to over 30 countries. I can't wait for this conversation. I just want to set a little bit of context. And Cheryl, I appreciate you calling this out to me because I was like, yeah, the 100th episode. And you were like, that's big, Mo. And I just want to, it was September of 2019 when we started the series. And I hit the go live button for the first time and I was absolutely terrified. I don't like being on camera any more than anybody else likes being on camera. But I often say that comfort is a privilege. And I was willing to get uncomfortable and be in front of the camera because from this start, this series has been about amplifying the work that great people like the four of you are doing so that we can all learn together, so that we can continue to be better at DEI leadership. And the series has been for people that are committed to DEIB, whether in role or actions, and for people that are just starting or people that have been doing the work for decades. And I want you to think about everything that has happened in the past 4 years. We've been through a global pandemic, right? Many people lost friends and family members. We had the summer of racial reckoning. We've had a complete redesign of work. There has been here in the US, we had a presidential election, we had a siege on our capital, we've seen the rise in hate groups, we've seen legislation coming down. It has been a lot. And through it all, I kept hitting go live. And part of that was selfish because this series, and I might get choked up, I am getting choked up because when I would hit those points when I couldn't believe that we could make things better, I would get in conversation with one of you and I would learn something new and I would have my motivation sparked again. And what's great is it wasn't just me. I have people that at the most random times, I'll get an email or I'll get a message on LinkedIn. I was recently speaking at a DEI conference and 2 people separately who I've never met before came up and said how much they appreciate this series and learning. And so for our 100th anniversary, and I hope 100 more, we're going to stay in conversation about what's working, what's next, what we can be proud of, what we can learn together. So the 4 of you, let's dig in. And I want to talk about everything that's happened over the past 4 years. What have you learned? And Andres, I would love for you to kick us off. What have you learned about leading this work over the past 4 years?
Sure. So first of all, Mo, before I go there, just wanted to say thank you so much for the invitation. I'm always winning when I'm actually with this type of stellar and esteemed panelists and reconnecting with some of the greatest chief diversity officers and executives that I know, and much success to you in the next 100 certainly episodes that you will have. So thanks for the invite. So let me set a little bit of stage in terms of, or maybe context in terms of how I want to answer that question. So working for healthcare, and to your point earlier about setting some context, we're the level 1 trauma center in southeastern Wisconsin. And I am a big believer that either you stay on the sidelines or you decide to get into the field and play full in. And I remember vividly in 2016, when we had our watershed moment here in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, when an African-American young man, similarly to George Floyd, was actually tragically killed in our community. And that led to the 3-day unrest. And I think, Texana, you and Cheryl might have been here then. And you remember the outpouring, the outcrying of our community. And I remember that became the watershed moment, not only for the city, but for us. Because I remember about a week before that, I was meeting with my senior executives that are part of our diversity council, and certainly our CEO chairs that group. And I remember sharing with them how palpable it just felt, right? I mean, it was thick in the air. You could tell, you could cut the tension in the air of it was just the tipping point, and it was going to take just one more tragic event for that outpouring, that outcrying. And so for us, that has been our journey over the last 4 years, right? And not so much the learning, but also the affirmation that our BIPOC communities have been left behind, and that no one care, and certainly like healthcare as a field, as an institution, right? The systemic racism that exists and has been embedded is just very clear. When you saw how people, to your point, were dying and people were not given access to care, or when we actually then had finally the vaccinations available, right? How we actually took that process and approach of providing that in very affluent communities first, and we left our BIPOC communities behind, right? And so we wanted to be counted in that process. We wanted to make sure that we were catalytic in making a difference. And so to your question at hand, and apologize to my colleagues here, to everyone, but wanted to stage a little bit here, some of that context, there were some things that we learned and some things that were affirmed. So for example, one of the things that I think the five of us have seen is the creation and proliferation of this CDO role over the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that in many ways, organizations didn't want to be left behind. And so many of them have created the role just for window dressing. It's very performative in nature. And I think that now that we are in a new normal, we're seeing how the role is being right sized. It's being buried 4 levels below where it has been or where it should be. CDOs are being asked to perform miracles with very little resources and a team of 1. And so would we do that to any other leader in the C-suite? Of course not. But we expect miracles out of our CDOs when we're not positioning them for success. And so I think that that's the first, concern and data point that I have seen in terms of what has transpired over the last 4 years. The second one, and I think you touched on this one too, Mo, is really the shift that we have seen, right, in terms of the new ways of working. And I don't think, right, that we're going to go back to the old ways. Actually, I just read an article yesterday of a particular CEO in the airline business that said to all the other ones who were moaning or crying or concerned, and says, I know where my staff is. They're actually in my airplanes going somewhere else, right, to enjoy work-life integration. And by the way, they have become far more productive, and we have the flexibility, right? And so for those of us who are truly, want to be great workplace of choices or employers of choice, I think that what we have seen is that by being flexible with our hybrid or virtual models, we actually now have expanded our ability to hire talent from other parts of the nation or the world that we haven't had before. So I think that that's another big shift in terms of our us as employers. The third one quickly here is the increased adoption of technology and artificial intelligence, right? AI, as we call it. And I think that while that is actually a blessing, and I'm glad that we were able to stand up that vertical for us in less than 72 hours as we enter COVID to provide great care, equitable care to our patients, I'm also reminded that there's a lot of algorithmic biases that are built into those applications and into those platforms. And my concern is, how are we at the table, number one, right, to have those crucial conversations with our colleagues? And B, how are we ensuring that that voice is inserted in those discussions? Because my concern is we're creating great applications, we have great platforms, but we are not assessing and equipping our BIPOC communities accordingly to be able to have access to those platforms, right, or applications. And so that's a true concern, and we're going to see much more of that than ever before, right? That's the rapid, I think, increase and innovation and disruption that we're going to continue to see in the work that we lead. And then the fourth one quickly here, because I want to give Texana a chance to answer the question here as well, is I think as we look at the EDI, or in our case, the JEDI strategy, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, to my point earlier, I think that we fundamentally have to start having crucial conversations. And as one of my leaders like to say, we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And we need to have these crucial conversations around topics that matter. And for us, it's about social justice and health justice. And if I'm not willing and equipped to have those conversations, right, or equipping my team to do that, then it is a disservice to my leaders, to my staff, and more importantly, to the communities that we serve. And so I think that those are fundamentally four things, again, that either we have learned or have been affirmed over the last 4 years.
I think that's great. And Texan, I want you to follow on. I want to jump in with two really quick points that I think are important, particularly during Disability Pride Month. And that is COVID not only laid bare inequities for BIPOC, it also laid bare inequities for disability community, and new ways of work have allowed our most underemployed population, which are folks with disabilities, to actually actively be employed in the workplace. So when you say it's led to great outcomes, particularly for the disability community as well. And Texan, I'd love to hear some of the learnings from you over these last 4 years.
Okay, well, thank you. And first of all, Mo, congratulations on 100 episodes. I agree with Cheryl. It is a big deal. And so when I think about what I've learned, particularly these last 4 years, I would characterize it more as a rude awakening.
Mm.
And the reason why I mention that is based on my 20 plus years doing this work. I absolutely have seen peaks and valleys. However, I did not expect such an abrupt change around DE&I. It was just in May of 2020 when George Floyd was murdered that caught the attention, I would say, actually of the world. We had support on DE&I, generally, universally. And really, in terms of DE&I professionals, we had some swag. I mean, we were in demand, everything. And there was true commitments that were being made around DE&I. And here, just 3 years later, we have lost rights. DE&I training is under attack with book bans and even rewriting history. Black people benefiting from slavery? Really? And all of this had just, actually reminded me around how not to take for granted the work that we do, of what in terms of from successes. And the other thing is also the impact we have as professionals and how important our role is. So even though, there has been certainly some setbacks and discouragements, and I've certainly have cried my tears, is that I also find joy in understanding the reward that we get in making a difference in our organization. I would also mention, in terms of the learning aspect, is really in terms of the fact of how important it is to build an infrastructure within your organizations on DE&I, to actually integrate and embed it into your practices, your policies, particularly around your values, so that it is more a way of how you're conducting business. And guess what? When you're integrating, it's not easy to unmantle it because it's embedded.
Yeah.
The other part of that is around how champion leaders around diversity that really have had those aha moments, those awakenings, that have really partnered with you. One thing that I've appreciated, again, during my career is how they've gone to other organizations, and I see them being a champion in other organizations, is that there is still reasons to be encouraged. There's still reasons to understand that you can make a difference, but most importantly, in terms of the biggest lesson learned, is around the integrating and making this a part of your business.
how, right? It's how you do
Mhm,
business. It's not separate.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, mhm.
Well, and I think that is that leads to the next question of what do you have cause to celebrate over the last 4 years? What are some of those wins with everything that's been happening? And I loved what you said, Texana, like we had some swagger for for a while there. Glassdoor was showing it was the fastest growing hiring position. It seems to be going the other way right now. So
Yeah.
let's talk about those wins. Alex, what are you proud of? What are some of the wins? What are some things that are cause for joy and celebration?
Yeah, happy to share. Well, first and foremost, congrats Mo and team for this huge accomplishment. I just start first with gratitude and appreciation just for being in this moment, in this conversation, in this cause for celebration. And I think we do have a lot to celebrate in terms of some of the adversities that I think all of us have faced. As DEI practitioners, there's also the flip side of a lot of advancement that we have done in this work. And I will share from my perspective, I'm a little bit newer to the DEI space in terms of a full transition into the DEI work. I started my DEI journey about 3 years ago in my previous employer to go full on to this work. But as I always say to folks, I consider myself a DEI practitioner. I never call it an expert because it's constantly evolving. We're constantly learning in this space. But I consider myself a DEI practitioner pretty much my whole life, right? In terms of my lived experiences, the things that I have been able to benefit from. I mean, I started my career as an inroads intern. I've benefited from a multitude of different diversity programs and leadership programs focused on individuals such as myself. And now I'm in a position where I can take a lot of those learnings and the things that have helped benefit me for the greater good. How can we build for future generations? How can we think about those building blocks to help advance other underrepresented communities? So for me, it's been a great learning journey over the last 3 years. And I would say room for celebration from my standpoint is starting to see some incremental progress at more of our senior executive levels. There's always been this gap of seeing people that reflect ourselves in leadership positions. You can start to see some of that change in companies that are really, truly serious about being very intentional about who they hire into certain roles, and not just for face sake, but also into very key and strategic roles within the business. And then what that signals to folks coming into the organization, newer generations coming into the workforce, it signals progress, and it also signals to them that they can see themselves as future leaders in your organization. So as that paradigm starts to shift and organizations start to really double down their efforts at more of the senior levels, then you'll start to see some progress really reflected across your entire workforce demographics. And I've started to see that. I know there's a lot of companies that are also holding themselves accountable for it. And I think the more we see companies holding themselves accountable, reporting out those numbers and metrics, and really getting into the nitty gritty, it's not just saying we have a great representation of people of color, but the real questions are, what does that representation look like at the top? What does that representation look like across all levels of the organization? And how is that spread across a multitude of your functions and departments? Are you making sure that those demographics first reflect the census and the demographics of our entire country? And I recognize that's different from a global standpoint, but are you making sure you're reflective of your communities? And then also, are we making sure that that representation is reflected in very key strategic parts of the organization that are going to truly drive change? So for me, I'm encouraged when I see companies now putting out reports, being very transparent about that information. And that transparency goes a long way because, again, it signals progress, and it signals year over year intention. And it also provides, I think, a little bit more visibility for the future employees of that company so that they can see themselves at a company that is holding itself accountable and transparent. I would also share over the last 3 years, I have had the absolute privilege and again, I always speak as a DEI practitioner, not necessarily of my employers, but I've had the privilege of working for two companies that have been a part of a broader movement, and that movement is called 110. And that specific engagement is a coalition of companies completely focused on bringing in 1 million Black Americans into family sustaining wage jobs over the next 10 years. And we have really started to see how that initiative has actually started to change the mindset for companies around having a skills first mindset, removing degree requirements, credential requirements for certain entry level jobs, and really starting to focus on hiring for skills, capabilities, and potential. And that is a very interesting game changer because it's starting to influence policy. It's influencing how we hire. It's influencing how we develop, we promote individuals. And it starts with, for instance, a hyper focus on Black talent. But the beauty of that is when you create a pathway for one underrepresented group, you create a pathway for a multitude of underrepresented groups. And if you start to show incremental progress and make progress for one community, you will start to open up the aperture for several communities. And what I'm really encouraged by in seeing that progress and seeing this coalition and effort focused on one community, it's starting to translate in policies and process, and it's starting to also increase the opportunity for other communities that are highly underrepresented across corporate culture. So those have been some things that I just wanted to share, have been truly inspiring for me and a reason to celebrate.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you can see the wave behind me. We talk about in this work, the ripple effect.
Yeah.
Right. And the positive ripple effect. So I have that to remind me. I've actually got one. So one behind me, one in front of me, always remembering about that ripple effect. And I love what you said. It's not a zero-sum game. Cheryl, how about you? What are your wins and cause to celebrate these past 4 years?
First of all, Mo, I just want to echo what my colleagues have said. We're going to celebrate you just for a minute here because what you've been involved in, my sister, and I do consider you my sister, has really been amazing. And you've created a space where we can all show up and just be a stronger community. So thank you for that. I just would say back to this notion of community, one of the things that I feel most excited about is that we have a bigger community than we had before. There are more of us now doing this work. This work, as we know, can be exhausting. It can be lonely. You can feel isolated. And the fact of the matter is there are now more of us. And what I also love, there are more of us approaching the work in different ways. I mean, 4 years ago, were there social impact officers? Nope. Global impact officers? Nope. Chief belonging officers. And so what I also really love and think that I love what Texana said, we can't take this for granted, is the fact of how our practice has actually grown and evolved. And there's no one size that fits all in terms of how we should approach this work. And I think that we need to pause and celebrate the fact that we have many different ways to evolve this work. That, at one point in time, we talked about people, profit, planet, ESG, CSR, whatever might work. DEIB has now become core and is integrated in so many different ways. And what I love about that is that that does give us the way, like the launching pad, to actually take this work in the directions that it needs to go for individual organizations. I'd say one other thing that I really think we have to celebrate. We have elevated the strategic importance of this work, and it has become even more firmly embedded into the overarching strategy of major organizations, as opposed to, and sometimes it could happen, it could just happen, it could just kind of sit over there on the side. No longer can this work sit on the side. And I really think that that's something that, while it sounds very fundamental, it's also something that we should really celebrate. Last point that I will make, I celebrate the influence that we now have at higher levels, perhaps than we had before, and the followership that has resulted because of that. And we brought more people along. TD Jakes had a quote, and I'm going to have to look at my paper to read it. He said, disruption is the gateway to opportunity. We have a whole heck of a lot more disruptors now that are in this boat with us, and we need those disruptors to help us get this work done. To me, those are all reasons to celebrate.
I think that's great. And I think that actually leads into this really interesting dynamic that we're in right now, where DIB is being used as a political punching bag. Right? It's sort of a playbook right now for some folks to center this work as political, which is both puzzling and completely obvious, right? Why that would be happening. And I'm just, this is one of the things that, you know, personally, I know each one of us has been facing, our organizations have been facing. We've seen some organizations make some huge missteps around this, and some that have been navigating it really well. And I am curious, Texana, one of the conversations that you and I have all the time is around politics, and how to navigate that. In fact, we have a section in Everyday Inclusion around politics, not taking a political stance, but how do you navigate? How have you been navigating now when it is so front and center, people trying to force it through a political lens?
Well, I'll tell you, it is a matter of navigating. There's not, as Cheryl was also mentioning around, you know, there's not just one way to do it. But I would say my approach that I'm taking is to really ground the DNI work on our values, of truly making sure that they understand the human part of this, and the fact of we're really wanting to make sure that we can work effectively together, that everybody feels like they belong, everybody feels like they're welcome at our workplace, that they're treated with dignity and respect. The fact of we depend on each other. If we don't have each other, we cannot be able to succeed our business objectives. So I really look at just being able to ensure that what we're doing, that we talk about our values and the whys of why we're actually doing it. And then to also understand that we can agree to disagree, but that doesn't mean that we still cannot be able to work together. So with that, in terms of also making sure, again, around having an integrated strategy, to be intentional on how we actually are positioning things.
Mm.
So whether we're talking about DNI training or various different events, is to what is the language that we're using so someone doesn't misinterpret that we're trying to shame someone or that they are being excluded. In fact, for the month of August, when we do this every year, is that we call Inclusion Month. So although other months that we recognize, we do some comprehensive programming on different federal heritage months, we do dedicate 1 month, which we call Inclusion Month, to really recognize and appreciate all the dimensions of diversity, everything that makes us unique and different, and all that we have in common. And so that's where we also ensure is that some of those voices that don't typically get involved have that opportunity to be involved and visible, and again, be able to embrace how we are working together, how we also want to make sure that we are practicing inclusive type of behaviors. And then lastly, I would say in terms of just really ensuring that we're leveraging our CEO, our leaders throughout all levels of the organization, that they are involved, and it's just not certain people that are directly connected either with our DNI team or around the our talent network, is that we have other leaders messaging. And so that's one reason why we have a diversity competency that is part of what we call Ready, Set, Grow, our career framework, etc. From whether or not you're interviewing, we have it embedded in our interview questions around DNI to every part of our talent process. And so that way we can be able to have the leaders to be able to also demonstrate some of those behaviors.
Yeah, so it's not just coming from the Office of DEI.
Yeah.
That it
Mhm.
is. Everybody can speak to this. And I think, Texana, you talked about values and you talked about everyone, right? That inclusion is everyone. And so much of this is about conversations too, right? And sometimes it's the one-off conversations that you're having. Andros, I'm curious, how have you been navigating this sort of heated political lens on the work?
Absolutely. And I will touch on a couple things that Texana mentioned or referenced, because we have built kind of the same approach or playbook, if you will, from that perspective. I have been very fortunate that for the last 8 years, I have worked for a CEO that is extremely inclusive, that doesn't shy away from having the crucial conversation. And she is a phenomenal steward of this work. Actually, I joke with her, but she knows I mean it, that she's truly the chief diversity officer. And when she cannot wear that hat, then I step in. I mean, that's how intimate Kathy is and how much she values this work. Actually, this morning, point in case, I came back from our diversity council, which she chairs, and we had a phenomenal conversation around a number of key topics there. And so one of the things that we have done is really create a structure that makes sense for us. So having that governing council, having very senior leaders sitting around that table, including my VP of government affairs, and that's a key individual or leader that I need to have in speed dial, because there's so much that is happening, whether locally, regionally, or nationally, that I need to actually have her weigh in, or to bounce off ideas, right? Or generate some recommendations around this work. And so the landscape is ever evolving. Obviously, we live in a state that is super conservative. We have a number of state and also federal legislators that are starting to go down the path of wanting to introduce legislation that is anti-DE&I. And they're very clear about what they want to certainly accomplish with that. And next year, as if that was not enough, we're going to be hosting the Republican National Convention here in town. So things are just starting to heat up for us. And so I had a conversation with our CEO and I said, listen, things are going to happen. We're going to be on the limelight. And again, if something ever happens in the community, a lot of those issues are going to obviously overspill and come into our ecosystem here, because we're the level 1 trauma center. So we need to understand and be very clear about our stance and whether we're going to erode or not in terms of our values, our commitments. And so again, to Texana's point, we have anchored our strategy on our values. We have anchored our processes and probably more of our recommendations around our strategy and some of those commitments that we have made. And I think that the other beauty of it is also including voices that haven't been involved before sitting around that table. For example, our business research groups, and really having them weigh in and also educating them so they can continue to be ambassadors and spokespersons, right, for the work that we lead collectively, as well as something that we started during COVID that has been pivotal for us, which is also providing room around that table for our community and for our consumers. And I think that we started a number of years ago what we call community conversations with BIPOC communities. And that has really led to the co-creation of the right strategies moving forward. And I think that that's really has been kind of our secret sauce, really kind of navigating this really evolving landscape, but really including the right individuals around the table, having discussions and making sure that ultimately we're able to arrive at the right decisions based on our mission, our values, our strategic imperatives, and then ensuring that also, as importantly, that we are communicating effectively. And so we've created this communications algorithm now as well, that when things happen internally and or externally, we know whether we're going to have to respond to it or not. And then who's going to be that source, right? To Texana's point, it doesn't just rely on the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, because diversity includes everyone, right? And this is an imperative, as business transformation is, or clinical care, for everyone. And so everyone owns this space. And so we know who needs to respond, what's going to be that response. And so we have baked in, again, bringing people back to our values, to our mission. And I think that that has been part of our secret sauce in navigating this really evolving landscape and really difficult one, knowing that at the end of the day, it comes also with potential risk of losing funding. And we are seeing it in our own state where healthcare systems who are tied to obviously higher ed institutions are losing some of their funding, particularly in the LGBT space for certainly conducting or providing gender affirming surgeries in their facilities, especially children hospitals for that matter. So this is truly a game changer for many of us in our state. And so we have to navigate it. And our CEO has been very clear that if it comes down to having to put at risk some of the funding stream that we get, well, again, we're not going to erode from our commitments, from our values, from our strategic imperatives. But it's certainly something that we continue to monitor.
Well, and I appreciate, I don't think this is going to be the last conversation that we're going to have on this, y'all, because I think this is one of the hardest, there are already hurdles to this work, and this is hurdle to the work. And I appreciate what both of you said in terms of anchoring who are we, right? What do we stand for? And what does inclusion actually means everybody. It is not at the expense of any group. And you both talked about language and policy. And so you can't, this is not one that you're gonna be able to deal with off the cuff, y'all. Right? This is more conversations to come. So let's talk about the future. What do we hope for? Let's say we're at episode 200. It's 4 years from now. What do you see for the future of DEIB, Cheryl? You're on mute.
I saw that. I knew that. I should have learned that 3 years ago. One of the things that I hope for, so let's just go back to when we were children and we were learning how to ride a bike. You'd fall off, you'd get back up, you'd fall off again. Eventually you learned how to ride the bike, right? The analogy I make to that is, what have we learned over the last 3 years post George Floyd? And my hope, my biggest hope, is that it does not take another national tragedy or a global tragedy for us to sustain the momentum of this work. And it's unfortunate, but sometimes real, that in human nature, it takes pain to create change. And I sure hope that we've experienced enough pain that we don't have to fall off the bike over and over again in order to learn how to stay on and ride successfully. So that's the biggest hope that I have, because there's such great positive momentum underway. For me, the second thing that I'm really optimistic about, and I heard my colleagues also speak to this.
Pause you for a second, Cheryl.
Absolutely.
Loved about that analogy, and I'm going back to teaching my kids to ride a bike. It's easier to ride the bike when you've got a little bit of speed.
It is.
If you, right, starting from stop
It
is
is.
so hard, right? And you fall over if you
True.
right, if you slow down or you stop. And so I
Yeah.
love what you're saying, like we've fallen off the bike, we have some momentum. Let's keep that momentum,
Yeah.
because it gets easier.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yeah.
sorry. There's a whole
No.
politics I could go into.
No,
right?
I can tell that's gonna be a future episode. I think the second thing is, it goes back to, and Andrea spoke to it, it's all about the people, all the people. I'm so optimistic that now that we've had no choice but to embrace bigger groups of people, that we keep all of them at the table, and that we don't forget about the value of their voice. You know, the person that's sitting in the corner that's an extreme introvert could have the brightest idea of the day. For us, where over 60% of our population is manufacturing focused, 3,000 of our 11,000 associates sit in West Michigan. Someone spoke about extremely conservative. That's a conservative part of the country. Those voices mean a heck of a lot to me and to our organization. And we spend a lot of time, and will, as we evolve our strategy, we're in the midst of evolving to belonging, becoming part of our overarching DEI ecosystem. Those voices are critically important to listen to. But equally as important, and this would be the third thing that I would say that I'm excited about beyond our employees, are the broadened network of stakeholders that we now have really strong relationships with that will not let us allow this work to go backwards. Customers, suppliers, nonprofit organizations, community leaders. If you separate the politics out of it, we still have a vast group of stakeholders that all now, they've learned how to get on that bike and ride it, and they want to be our partners on this journey. So I'm really most excited about that. Last thing that I would say is I'm optimistic that the really great CEOs that have led this work, including the one in our organization, that we can help them stay the course. It's hard for them too, right? We've got to be their partners, and we've got to sustain them, and we've got to provide them the support that they need as well. So I'd say those are some of the things that are top of mind.
I love that. Alex, how about you? What are you hoping for?
Well, I fully agree with Cheryl. Those are fantastic points. I almost want to go back to something that Texana had mentioned around making sure DEI, DEIB, whatever acronym you use or prefer, is fully embedded in the entire organization, right? That it's not a separate HR initiative. It's not a project. It is not something that's siloed. It is something that's completely embedded across the entire process. And I think of myself a lot as more of a talent practitioner. I want to make sure from where I stand that DEI is completely embedded in the entire talent lifecycle. Everything from your employer brand and how you attract and recruit talent, to mentorship and development, through career progression, succession planning, performance management. I mean, the diversity of slates that you have with candidates coming in should be reflective of the diversity of candidates you have in your succession plans, in your distribution of performance, and ultimately how you retain these individuals, because they become your voice of your employer, and they then go out to their communities and speak about how great the company is and how attractive it is for those particular representative communities. So for me, it's just making sure that you're in lockstep, and we heard a lot about it here, right? Making sure you're in lockstep with a lot of your different stakeholders and partners across the business, that you have great advocates for. And I think my hope is that you'll have advocates in every part of the business that are hammering down for how important this work is, which takes me to my next point: inclusive behaviors. I think that's the biggest unlock, because that starts at the middle management level, and that starts at everybody's individual relationship with their manager. If you have the most inclusive leaders and managers of your entire workforce that have an inclusive mindset in everything they do, to me, that's the biggest unlock, because you could have a ton of support, advocacy, and encouragement from the top with strong leaders, but if that doesn't translate or gets cascaded down to meeting the workers where they are, then you're going to have a huge struggle in really pushing forth this work. So for me, my hope is that we'll be able to really shed light on the business value of being an inclusive manager, right? Making sure you have all, and we heard it here, making sure you have all voices at the table, making sure that it's not about what side of the political spectrum you're about, but more so, are you just creating room for more ideas? Are you making sure you're removing any bias around homogeneity and making sure that you're bringing new diverse ideas to the table? Because that's ultimately what's going to fuel innovation, and it's going to fuel creativity, right? So if you're thinking from that mindset, how to help advance the business through innovation, through creativity, through more voices at the table, then those managers that create more space for that are going to be the most successful. That's going to help drive business value, and that's going to help drive the business forward to ultimately achieve what it needs to achieve. So for me, those are probably two additional things I would mention to all the great points that Cheryl had also stated.
Well, and we know there's so much data around the power of those frontline leaders, right? And you talked about innovation, we talked about those things, but also some joy, right? We spend time, work is the last place, regardless of who we are, that we have to come together in community, and we spend a lot of time with these folks. It's a lot more joy, like it's just better, joyful, happier if everybody, right, is included and feels that sense of belonging. Somebody sent me, you all know I always end with asking you for a truth bomb. But first I want to address somebody sent me a question privately, and that was that I'd like you all to address. How do you take care of yourself doing this work? Self-care. Right. We've seen a lot of burnout. Sometimes it's hard, it's difficult. So any advice, best practices, what do you do to be able to get up motivated and doing great work? And any of you can feel.
Could I start? And I'll be very brief. Something as simple for me as taking just a 10-minute walk in the morning just to clear my head and get myself ready. And then at the end of the day, and my husband and family know this, like I need solitude for like 30 minutes. I just need dead quiet space just to unwind from the day. So those are just 2 quick tips.
And I think those are great. You see, I've got my tracker, Cheryl, right? I'm the same with get that walk. Yeah, mine's not as high tech as yours. Others?
I'll share quickly that 2 things quickly. One for me has been same way that I abide by what's expected of me at work. I also have made those type of commitments to the family. So when I disconnect, I fully disconnect, and I am becoming much better about not sending emails late, right? Because then that starts the whole chain of then my team having to read those emails and respond as well. So I think it's making sure that I can recharge battery, that I can actually enjoy things that are meaningful to me. And that's my family and my grandkids. So that is something that grounds me and provides me and fulfills me with a lot of joy and, recharges my battery. And then the second one is this work is hard work, but also hard work, right? As we all know it. And so it's also about having fun with your team. And so quarterly, and tomorrow will be that quarterly team meeting for me with my direct reports. I take them offsite and we do a little bit of team building. And then it's about breaking bread and avoiding to talk shop as much as we can. And it's about dedicating my time to really understand what matters to them and seeing them through that whole, right, that from a holistic perspective of who they are and everything that they bring, right, their whole self to work, rather than just through a sliver that should only matter to me, right, as an employer. And that is something that I talk to my team about. Let's have fun. Let's get to know each other at a personal level. And I think that's how you build trust. And that's how then people know that you care about them. So those are 2 quick ways that I've been able not only to replenish myself, but also to care about my team and really have fun as well in the process.
Love it. Texana?
Well, I would say, and it sounds really simple, but I remind myself of why I do this work, and what I do ongoing is that I have a file. It's my I did good file. In my I did good file, I keep those notes that I received from associates, etc., on how they have personally been impacted. Because it's really, for me, that in addition to overall organizational results, is how I'm impacting individuals. So when I read those individual emails about how might have helped them with their career or dealing with a difficult manager, or, etc., is that really does re-energize me. So I check in with my I did good file.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I want to leave enough time for the truth bomb. So Alex, you can put yours in the chat if you want. I want to, we're hosting our first conference, y'all, for the Moxie Exchange. So we're having EI Cubed is happening September 13th and 14th in beautiful Fort Collins, Colorado. We're going to be having lots of conversations just like this. And so if you'd like more information, we've got it on the website. I'm sure somebody from the team will drop it in the comments. One of my favorite quotes is, the world needs dreamers and the world needs doers, but most of all, the world needs dreamers who do. And I really appreciate the 4 of you being dreamers who do. Dreaming of a better, more inclusive workplace and world, and then doing the work to get us there. So if you would all leave me with your last mic drop on doing the work, that would be great. And Alex, let's start with you.
Happy to start. Well, and when you asked me this when we first did our initial interview, I thought back and I went back to that, and that still holds true even to this day, because what I had mentioned when you had asked me that the first time was we have to double down on this work and in these efforts. And I think that's so much more true now, thinking about the environment we're in, the circumstances that we're in, because I think what you're seeing is a little bit of a blessing in disguise. You're seeing some companies start to make cuts, deep cuts into this part of their organization, these types of individuals that are extremely talented and practitioners in this space. And you're starting to see some companies start to divest a lot of that work from their overall portfolio. But what I think what you're also seeing is those companies that know how important this is, are thinking about the future consumer, future demographics, the future of potential of this country. They are the ones actually staying in the work and doubling down their efforts. And so you're going to start to see a little bit of a bifurcation of folks that were saying a lot during times and now divesting, and you're going to see others that are going to continue to push their foot forward and keep the foot on the gas pedal in this work. And to me, those are the ones that are going to build the most inclusive brands. They're going to build the most inclusive workplace environments for people to feel safe, to feel that they can be themselves. And to me, those are ultimately the companies that are going to shine coming out of this.
Yeah, love it. Who wants to go next?
I'll just say that I'm a person of faith, and I believe that good and right prevails. So don't give up, keep the hope, find those things that actually, we're all going to have our moments, we're discouraged, etc. But do whatever you do to be encouraged, because you're important and you need to be the one that makes the difference, at least with the areas that you have control. And that's what I would say in terms of my focus is, Rom, I might not be able to change the world, but I can be able to influence the
Mm.
area and scope that I have.
Love it. Love it. Andres, how about you?
Yeah, I will share that. For me, it's something that a good colleague of ours actually mentions, and that is Joe Santana. And he mentions about sonar signal, right? And I think nature is a great teacher. And if you think about bats, they don't have great eyesight, but they have great hearing. And what they do is they send that signal out, right, to understand where maybe objects are or maybe they're prey. And my point in saying that is, I think we need to be much more keen into listening for that sonar signal and try to tune out or minimize the noise. I think that if you get caught in the noise, you unfortunately going to erode from what's, important and to stay focused, right? And keep that momentum. And so that is actually one of the greatest lessons learned that I have gained over the last few years. And I continue to share that with my team and with my executives of let's stay, to that signal, sonar signal, and let's tune out the noise.
But Cheryl?
I would say for me, it's be the change you want to see. And as a practitioner group, above anything else, we are really all change agents. Sometimes I think that gets missed, and we are strong change agents. So drive and be the change that you want to see.
This was everything and more that I hoped for this 100th episode. I've learned, I am fired up. I know that everybody that has tuned in is as well. I just appreciate y'all so much. And Everyday Inclusion community, thanks for being on the learning journey, for staying curious, for continuing to hone your craft. Everybody, each one of us, let's just keep doing that next right thing. And here's to 100 more. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
Mo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.